So it doesn't do it in the direct sense, right? It's not a direct correlation. It's not A to B. There's another factor in there. The dollar, in order to give it the illusion of strength, right? We need to have progressively cheaper and cheaper labor. That's the way that this system has been set up, is to have labor prices going down, and that's achieved by flooding the market, by flooding the job market with so many people that it just artificially pushes wages down. Okay, so wages, the employment market, the job market, is a market like anything else, or at least it's supposed to be. Now, in clown world, it's not. But if you actually have a free market, and you actually had an honest culture and an honest set of borders, right, and you weren't flooding the country with progressively cheaper and cheaper labor, what would happen is the domestic population would start seeing their wages increasing, or at least the spending power would be. So because the assets would be inflated. I know when I talk about assets, I'm talking about like your buildings, your infrastructure, your houses, things like that, farmland, all of that. They would, they blow up, for example, in a bubble. But then they find out there's not enough people to support any of this, and then it plops back down to normal. And then your younger people, your people who are working for less money, they're able to afford those things. They're able to buy those assets up and actually be able to participate in the economy, right? They're in a meaningful fashion. So, but that would expose all the inflation, and that would expose the banks for what they've done. Because remember, banks have lent out so much money at the peak of all of these markets, right? So all of these assets were blown up into these stratospheric, ridiculous numbers, and the bankers kept loaning money into that, right? So if you understand the way that bank balance sheets work, if you've lent out, $100 billion on all of these houses and buildings at their peak value, and then we find out, oh my God, there's not enough people to support the back end of this, and now there's not enough buyers for all this shit, then what would naturally happen? Well, in a normal free market, what would actually happen? Well, then those prices would deflate. They'd go like that, right? The bottom would just fall completely out of it. And they might lose 50, 60, 70% of their perceived value, okay? And what that means is that the banks who have lent all this money, they lose 60 to 70% off their balance sheet. And then they are supposed to come in, the principals of the bank, that's the owners of the bank, the shareholders, are supposed to come in and rescue that and say, okay, well, here's the difference. We'll make up the difference because we lost a bunch of money on this ridiculous bet that we've been making. We've been making these ridiculous bets, and we thought it would go forever, and we're wrong, so now we're going to lose a bunch of money. That's not what they do, though. What they're doing is trying to because they don't have the money to cover any of these losses. So they would have to go bankrupt, right? That's what that means. Imagine all of these gigantic banks. Imagine all the big 6 mega banks all going bankrupt. Yeah, that's what it would be. It would be like, okay, well, all that money goes away, but then again, so does all the debt, and so that's the end of it. Well, they don't want to have that happen. They don't want to lose. They don't want to, and make no mistake, these people will drive the country, the U.S., right into the dirt, and they will. If they could get away with all of it, they would just straight nuke every American if they could get away with it, to not lose. That's how these guys think. So the idea is flood the labor markets, and what that'll do is that'll keep prices on wages down, so that way and then of course but nobody's buying these houses or anything. You're right, nobody's buying them. So they invent a bunch of fake companies, these fake shell corporations, and they buy them all up. And they pay a bunch of dollars. Where do they get the dollars from? They print them out of nothing. They just conjure them out of nothing. This is your currency being destroyed. This is why you're seeing the inflation that you're seeing. This is why this is all everything you're seeing is very predictable. This is all extremely predictable. And so that loss has to go somewhere. Someone has to take that loss. And if it's not going to be the bankers, and it's not going to be the politicians who have enabled all of this, then that means it has to go somewhere. And that would be the American working class. the people that are, the people that make up the country, right? Like the people, the capital P people. Those are the folks that are going to end up having to eat all of this if they win. This is, of course, why. I mean, I know that nobody likes to hear this, but this is one of the reasons why there's supposed to be a Second Amendment, is so that they can't do that. How you enforce this would be like, we're not going to eat your losses anymore. You guys are going to take those losses. Whatever promises you made to those shareholders and other countries and other governments, whatever promises you made to them, that is your problem, not ours, the American people. They can do with you whatever they want, but we're out. You leave the American people alone. But that's exactly how this works. So yeah, so these asset prices, because they've blown way up, they can't have them deflate. They're doing everything they can to not have them deflate. This is why you're seeing the news as of today that like net worths are supposed to be hitting like record highs. You've got record high stock market. Of course you do. You also have record high debt. Like the debt is just continuing to get worse and worse and worse, to the tune of like $1 trillion every 90 days or so. And that's just going to speed up, by the way, as time goes on. That's just going to get worse and worse and worse, because it's not real money. It's not real wealth. It's sort of like, going to, let's say you get a credit card with like a $50,000 limit, and you go to the bank and you take out a cash advance for $50,000. Do you have $50,000? No, you don't. You have $50,000 of debt that you've offset with $50,000 in cash, and now you have to pay the difference, because you're going to pay interest on that, unless you can pay it all back in one lump sum, plus fees on top of that, 3.5% fees. So, you see what I mean? There's no way out of that, right? You don't borrow your way out of debt. And that's exactly what they're attempting to do by just bringing more people in and then basically enslaving them for super duper cheap labor to try and prop this up, with no regard to what that's doing to the American people, the American working class, the people who are under 55, which is completely destroying. It's hollowing them out. They can't, most people at 55 and under right now, like I said a long time ago, Gen Xers, probably 70% of Gen Xers are just as screwed as millennials. It's probably more than that. It's probably closer to 75 to 80%. They're just as screwed as millennials and Zoomers. So, but yeah, that's how that works. I wish I had a better answer, for you, better news, but that's the reality.